Hi, it's been a while. Yeah, see the title down there? You excited for it? Not me. I'm not excited for it. Before I begin, you may want a little bit of an update as to what's been going on. Because I've been gone for like forever. I uploaded a video with my dad. It's going to be a fun little show that he and I are going to be consistent on, at least I hope. But yeah, I'm still alive. So, what happened? Well, after the events of what happened, and for those who know, you know, and if you don't know, sorry. I got into a really bad spot, mentally speaking, and so I took a lot of personal time to reevaluate things. I went to some therapy and so on. And then I had suffered another great loss. My dog passed away. I raised her since she was a pup, so that sort of brought my mental back down, and I had to climb back up again. And then not long after that, I got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, which actually makes it kind of hard for me to operate, physically speaking. I'm significantly weaker than I used to be. But I'm going through treatment for that now, too. So, everything's on the up and up. I'm still alive. Who is today's victim? Well, today's victim is none other than David Stig Hansen. Now, David Stig Hansen is a not geologist and not archaeologist. He's not any of the things required to do any of the things he claims. And having talked to him on Reddit, he genuinely does not seem to think that you need to present evidence for your claims. On top of that, he doesn't really seem to understand how the scientific method even works. For anyone who is not a scientist, science is about what's testable. If I can't test it, it's not science. Despite this being a primarily religion-oriented channel, or at least it used to be, I'll still do more religious videos, but it's not really... I'm branching out to doing other things as well. We are still very pro-science here on this channel, and indeed, I'll never tell you that there's scientific evidence for a god simply because I can't test that. The same thing goes for any other hypothesis, be it the Richart's Atlantis or ancient aliens were around. There needs to be actual demonstratable evidence. It can't just be, well, I think, therefore I feel, and I feel, therefore it's true. That is not serious science, and that never deserves to be taken seriously as science. Why is this important? Well, Mr. Hansen made a response to Stefan, Milo, and Miniminuteman over their ridicule of the Atlantis is the Richart structure. And I think it's really telling to show that David Stig Hansen has no idea what he's talking about. And I don't mean that he just doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean that he's also a hypocrite in that he'll accuse people of not being familiar with the area, but he himself is not actually familiar with the area. But we'll see that in the video. And with that, let's get to it.
It's a recent video by Stefan, Milo, and Milo Rossi titled The Actual Archaeology of the Richat Feature. It's not a structure, it's a feature. And I, someone who has spent 15 years researching this site, including 3 expeditions going there and countless hours doing Google Earth archaeology, where Stefan Milo himself has confirmed that this is a legitimate form of archaeology. So I'm an archaeologist. Watch the video.
Sorry, prematurely paused there. So let's address a couple things right off the bat. Just because you've been studying an area for 15 years by going there physically, that does not mean you know anything about the area. And indeed, when we get into the origins of the Richart later in the video, we're going to see that in spite of being there for 15 years, David Stig Hansen doesn't know anything about the area. Big shock, right? On top of this, Stephen Milo does not get to determine who is and is not an archaeologist. When he says Google Earth archaeology is legitimate archaeology, what he means is that real archaeologists with real credentials in archaeology will use Google Earth in order to do real archaeology. Why am I putting an emphasis on real? Well, Mr. Hansen has been so gracious as to put all of his credentials for us to see. Now, maybe I'm blind, and maybe I'm stupid. I don't see anything here outside of this bachelor's in science from the University of San Bernardino, which is just a bachelor's of science administration. It's not a bachelor's in a specific field. It's not anything worthwhile to an actual scientist. I don't see any other evidence that he knows anything about archaeology. I see a pretty good decorated history as being in the military and knowing Chinese, but that's pretty much it. And it's this kind of thing that's upsetting to me, because Mr. Hansen seems to have some pretty impressive credentials in other areas, yet he feels the need to basically lie about his familiarity with this one. Why?
Video, and you'll see. Now, it is clear to me that they put some very little effort into discussing the Richat structure, but their approach is not only superficial, it's also riddled with inaccuracies that deserves serious scrutiny. First of all, their smug little attitude throughout the video is quite triggering.
The smug attitude is because people who are not educated have the gall to suggest that the people who are educated somehow don't know what we're talking about. Again, we're going to get to the origins of the Richat, and it's going to become very, very clear that David Stig Hansen literally does not know what he's talking about.
It's clear that they believe they have all the answers without having to first demonstrate a basic understanding of the Richat structure.
One does not need to demonstrate basic knowledge on the Richat structure to be comfortable with the work done of other people who do know about the Richat structure. Just because you don't think that academia is legitimate doesn't mean that Stephen Milo and Milo Rossi have to pretend that your opinions on academia are even remotely correct or salient, especially when they're not. Again, you're going to make the big mistake as to where the Richat comes from, and it's self-evident from that alone that you yourself are infinitely more ignorant than you realize.
They're just going to be all smug and make fun of alternative theories. This is a dismissive approach that not only disrespects the complexity of the site, but also alienates those of us who have dedicated years to uncovering its secrets.
Exactly what's worth taking seriously? I'm very curious. Exactly what's worth taking seriously here? Is it the Atlantis idea? That the Richat's Atlantis? Something that neither you or Jimmy Corsetti or Graham Hancock or anyone else that claims this has ever definitively proven? And yet, oddly enough, all of you are insistent on it? Well, to be fair, not Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock's not convinced that the Richat structure is Atlantis, so I'm going to remove him from the equation. Everyone else that I've just listed is convinced of this. Again, with very little proof. They'll go on Google Earth and they'll say, look, I've done science. I've gone on Google Earth. No, science is the formulation of a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, and then presenting your evidence to other scientists to be scrutinized. And this is the part that really gets real scientists upset and mad, which causes the ridicule. Milo, myself, the other Milo, any other scientist is merely treating you how we treat each other. You want to be taken seriously, but then we treat you seriously, and then you start complaining that we're not accepting your ideas despite us having treated them seriously, because guess what? All ideas in science get scrutinized. The original creator of plate tectonics, his name escapes me at the moment, his original theory was rejected because he didn't have a mechanism for how it was happening. Without a proper mechanism, how are you going to explain it? Then we did find a proper mechanism, and we're like, whoa, he was actually right. And this is incredibly frustrating part of it all, is that there could very well be a plausible reality that the Richart structure is Atlantis. I personally don't think it's true. I haven't seen any evidence for it. But when people like David Stig Hansen act like this, it takes the plausibility and the credibility of the idea, and it makes it go way down. Because nobody takes a crybaby seriously.
Instead of fostering a constructive dialogue.
David, you blocked me on Reddit for giving you constructive dialogue. I even told you the layers that you would find if the area was flooded in order to get across to you what we would be looking for, what would convince us, and you blocked me eventually. Of course, way before that, I just started making fun of you because you were personally insulting me. You don't want constructive criticism, David. You believe the Richart structure is Atlantis. You don't care about how actual science is conducted. And then you will dismiss anybody who dare challenges you. And then worse, you'll project that behavior right back onto them. This is not how a scientist behaves, David. This is how a baby behaves.
Milo and Milo choose to mock alternative theories and overlook substantial evidence that could significantly enhance our understanding of the Richat.
Nothing about the Atlantis theory enhances our understanding about the Richart, because the Atlantis theory blatantly ignores realities about Atlantis and the Richart. Now, to his credit, David's going to point out that, yes, the Richart is bigger than Atlantis is said to be according to Plato. And you want to know what? I'll give credit where it's due. I can't get a lot of Richart advocates to even admit that, so good on you, David. Good on you. But that doesn't change what I've just said. The very notion of enhancing our understanding of a location with non-evidence it's just a bizarre angle to go about this. If you want to enhance our knowledge of the Richart, that's great. That's fantastic. Why don't you write a paper? Why don't you get a degree in this? You've already gotten several masters. Damn it, David, you're pretty good at schooling, and I'm willing to bet you could get a geology degree if you actually tried. But for some reason, it's like you've dropped all your marbles and you just don't care anymore.
This attitude is not only unprofessional, but it's also detrimental to genuine archaeological discourse.
This is some real pot calling the kettle black, David. Again, you blocked me, a real geologist who went out of their way to try and give you criticism. I didn't have to do it. You blocked me. If anyone's being detrimental to the conversation, it's the people who are blocking the people who are continuing the conversation when they just happen to say something you don't like.
And by presenting themselves as experts without substantiating their claims, they undermine the integrity of discussion surrounding the Richat structure.
Again, you haven't substantiated your own claims. So it's just wild that this could be said unironically by someone who can't seem to demonstrate any real, tangible evidence.
Right out of the gate, Stefan jumps into labeling this Richat structure as an eroded volcano. Okay, here's the thing. When you're discussing such a significant and complex site as the Richat, you don't just settle for the first thing you can find on Wikipedia and call it a day.
It's not the first thing on Wikipedia. The geology of the area has been well tested, well understood. We know it's an eroded volcano. I'm going to wait to show you the evidence, however, because he just says a lot of funny stuff first.
This isn't some casual topic that you'd expect someone claiming to discuss actual archaeology to dig deeper. Instead, he takes the easy route, and he confidently dismisses any possibility that there could be something more than just an eroded volcano.
Because it is an eroded volcano, and we have absolute evidence that it's an eroded volcano. The evidence that the Richart structure is a collapsed dome is pretty much so solid that it might as well be as solid as my phone here.
I can confidently say this oversimplification misses the mark entirely. The Richart Plateau, in which the Richat is embedded, is primarily composed of sedimentary sandstone layers that are 2,000 feet thick.
This is very incorrect. Here, on my screen, I have the stratigraphy of the Richart Plateau, and as you can very clearly see, it's primarily shale and slate. Now, to be clear, there is indeed some sandstone there, but it's only at the top layer, and it's only about 20 meters thick. So when David Stig Hansen says this first thing about the stratigraphy, he's lying. The vast majority of the material surrounding the Richart is mudstone.
You've got this 2,000 foot thick layer of sandstone, and it's embedded inside of it, 800 feet deep, 45 kilometers wide. So that's this disk of content that just vanished, okay? And when it vanished and when it eroded away, all these rings are there. The
Richart structure was never buried by this mudstone. Again, most of it's mudstone, actually, not sandstone. The Richart structure is the result of a collapsed volcano. And how do we know about it? Because the rings, the actual rings themselves, are comprised of gabbro. Gabbro is an igneous rock that results from slowly cooling magma, meaning it has to be from a volcano. If we look here at the second image I've got up, here is a construction of the gabbro rings as well as the gabbro core from the Abedin et al. 2021 paper on the geology of the Richart structure. And this is how I know that David Stig Hansen doesn't know what he's talking about, because in the later sections here, he's going to say that there's no volcanic rocks at all. That's just not true. The rings themselves are made of gabbro, and indeed, you can see that the rings, there, the green sections there, the magmatic gabbro core, lines up with the exposed rings. But that's not the only volcanic piece of evidence we have. There's also this, the kimberlite core. It's also mentioned in the Abedin et al. 2021 paper, and it too is exclusively as the result of a magma chamber. I'm pretty sure is what this one is. It's a singular shaft. Here's a paraphrase from my own paper on the Richart, citing two papers on this. The gabbro core, however, is clearly connected to the gabbro outcrop rings and may even connect directly to some of those structures, although that at this point in time is also speculation. Because of this, the gabbro core must date to the same time period as the rings and is thus related to the camp. Although it is important to note that the ring structure seen at the site today developed late and is thus not related to the gneiss of gabbro core itself. Meaning that according to both of these papers, the gabbro core and the gabbro rings, while connected, happened over time. It's not a normal volcano. It's a volcano that was active for a very long period of time. So when David Stig Hansen says it can't be a collapsed volcano, he's saying that completely ignorant to the reality that we have found the magma core of the volcano. And this brings me back to my earlier statements. David Stig Hansen wants to be taken seriously. He then has the audacity to suggest that Milo don't know what they're talking about when it comes to where the Richart came from. And then he just shows that he doesn't know anything about the origins of the Richart. So which one is it, David? If people aren't educated on where the Richart is from, wouldn't that include you?
Doesn't add up, as far as volcanoes go. If you look at any other volcanic dome or other type of volcano, you don't see anything like this in the world.
Hey, editing Josh here. The idea that we don't have any other collapsed or heavily eroded domes that make this structure, that's not even true in on itself. In fact, there are, at the bare minimum, 3 other structures in the Sahara alone that resemble the Richart, and they're playing for you as I'm saying this. It's pretty fallacious to assume that the tectonic regime would be the same for everywhere in the world. The environments are different. The time periods could be different. The context could be different. These are all basic geology. This is all basic Google geology. You don't need to get the education I have to know that one, David.
Okay, where did the rim of a caldera disappear to? And where did the content disappear to?
So he mentions the idea of like a disappearing caldera. And here's the thing, right? Not all magmatic structures are going to have a caldera. Once again, David Stig Hansen demonstrating that he just doesn't know what he's talking about.
There are no known volcanic calderas of this magnitude. Their absence of volcanic rocks further discredits the claim. So by dismissing other...
As I have just firmly established, the rings themselves are volcanic rocks. So when he says the absence of volcanic rocks, 15 years down the drain, nobody who knows the Richart unironically suggests that there are no volcanic rocks at the Richart. This is not only a mistake, it's just a flat-out lie. But because David Stig Hansen is not actually familiar with the Richart despite going there for 15 years, he makes this utterly bogus claim unaware of his own ignorance.
Credible theories like tectonic isostatic rebound or my Birkeland current / planetary discharge cymatic frequency theory, Stefan shows a convincing lack of depth.
Isostatic rebound created the rings? Are you serious? So for those who don't know, isostatic rebound is basically when a glacier pushes down the local crust, and when it's gone, the local crust comes back up. That's basically it. Anybody educated in basic geology will be able to tell you that isostatic rebound will not create massive structures like this. It just doesn't occur like that. You need tectonic action to push the Richart up the way it is pushed up. And I know this because when you look at the graphs associated with the actual geology of the region, you can see that it is littered in fault lines.
In his research to say it's an eroded volcano. Okay, look at a volcano and then look at that. When they talk about it's not the same size that Plato said, yeah, it's 4 times bigger. But don't ignore the fact that a volcano is about 10 or 20 times smaller. The unique concentric rings that are inside of it, they don't occur in volcanoes.
Volcanoes don't have a size limit. Volcanoes don't have a size limit. This is a fallacious argument. The Richart structure is 4 times bigger. I actually think it's 3 times bigger. I think he made a mistake there too. He could be right. Let's just assume he's right. It's a correct statement. It's bigger than Atlantis. Volcanoes don't have... They just don't have size limits. That's not part of the defining trait of a volcano. As for its unique rings, it's because it's associated with the camp. Now, the camp, also known as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, is a very well understood and documented phenomena. It's an area that was part of Pangaea that was heavily magmatic at the time and was covered with domes. So it was a very magmatically active area. That's really all you need to know about the camp. It's responsible for the rings. As Pangaea separated apart, that area started bending and twisting and whatnot. So, I mean, you can see evidence for the camp in North America. You can see it in South America. I believe you can even see more of it in the Middle East, unless I'm mistaken. And, of course, the entire area of Morocco down into Mauritania, it contains other pieces of evidence of the camp. This isn't a geology video. I could go into deeper about the camp, but I really don't want to do that. The point I'm making is that he's acting as though we don't know anything about the origins of the Richart, and we absolutely do. We know what it's associated with. This is just a lie. And I'm going to call it a lie because Hansen wants to pretend that he's educated on this. And so if he wants to be educated on this or be treated like he's educated on this, then the reality of it is he's just lying. He's not mistaken, he's lying.
Moreover, their video ignores extensive archaeological features that I've documented over my years of study. They briefly mention a structure called the castle, dismissing it as just a fence or a wall. However, during my visits, I documented what I referred, it's fortification number 1, exhibits modern-day stone piles, not old, probably from the 18th century, military infantry training, and far beyond what Stefan and Milo acknowledge.
Because it wouldn't be relevant to the actual conversation. Okay? Your big thing is that this area is Atlantis. So why would Fortification 1, if anyone even calls it that, I'm pretty sure no one calls it that, why would anyone care about this? Moreover, I'll just admit that I haven't seen his video going over this, so I'm not going to pretend like I know anything more about this fortification. It's just an irrelevant piece of data. Milo could have easily gone over it 1 billion times over and had incorrectly assessed that it was a swimming pool for all the difference it makes.
They just like, it's the archaeology. First of all, I actually thought they were talking about architecture. I thought I misread it. And it was the actual architecture. I think he may have changed the title. So I don't know. I didn't catch a screenshot, I don't think, but maybe I did. Anyway, simply calling it a fence without any substantial analysis of, like, for example, finding my channel and looking at the video that I provided, it just shows they actually don't understand the site at all.
Given that you got the origins of the Richart severely wrong, I'm willing to bet you got this wrong too, buddy. Why would you be a reliable source when you can't get the basic facts right after being there for 15 years?
They failed to address numerous canals visible both from the ground, from satellite imagery. These canals run on all sides of the Richat and suggest a sophisticated water management system that could have been part of an ancient civilization's infrastructure. In my research, I found that these canals are most likely deliberate constructions that connected the ancient Taman-Reset Paleo River to the Richat structure. I believe there was a big, large sea north, so it could have been all one sea at that point. And then south of the Richat, I believe, was another ancient sea.
Now, the Richat was never at ocean level. It was never at any level to be connected to the ocean. And since this revelation, a lot of Richart advocates have taken to suggesting that Atlantis was a city on the continent of Africa and that it was actually connected to some river. There were indeed rivers that went through the area, so I'm not going to lie about that. That's true. However, Plato unmistakably says it's an island. So let's go ahead and just assume he's right. this still would not be Atlantis. It still does not meet the description of Atlantis. Now let's go ahead and address reality. That is that I haven't seen these water canals, so-called water canals. If anyone wants to send me the water canals, I know David Stick Hansen's not going to do it because he freaking blocked me on Reddit. I think, realistically speaking, he's probably misreading what those are too. I've seen Google images of the Richart. Maybe they're small and maybe I haven't seen them. I don't see any evidence for any water canals. And he doesn't even bother to pull up an image of said water canals in this video, which kind of weird that you'd make a claim and then not prove it. But then again, I'm not surprised.
So ignoring these features, it's a significant oversight when they're starting to talk about the Richat structure. We know everything. There's some pictures we downloaded. Okay, another glaring omission is the Heart of Salt, Sebket El Guelb. I believe it's a degradation crater right in the center, marking a bullseye impact. I believe it decimated an entire quadrant of nearby mountain.
Now, we know everything about how impacts occur. There's been a lot of geology that goes into when an impact occurs, and I find this rather entertaining because one of the first theories about the Richart structure was that it was an impact site. And it wasn't until later geology, better geology, that we knew that it wasn't an impact. Primarily thanks to, the presence of the volcanic rocks that he thinks just aren't there. Mr. Hansen is essentially invoking old, outdated geology, which generally is associated with lesser educated geology. Why do you think that is, folks?
They totally don't even mention the Heart of Salt because they're not looking at the right maps. They're looking at Google Earth. I've looked at all the topographical maps as well, and you can see that this degraded crater marks a bullseye impact which decimates an entire quadrant of mountains in the center ring. Okay, which the absence of these mountains is very conspicuous.
The mountains are absent because they were almost never there to begin with. This is on the same level of when Ancient Aliens talks about the Nazca regions and they're talking about the mesas and they're acting like the aliens shaved off the top of mountains when in reality they're just naturally forming mesas. The reason why the mountain is not there is because it was never there to begin with.
The formation shows, and I'm talking about the crater, geological markers consistent with known impacts. Okay,
No, it does not. It doesn't. Okay, known impacts sometimes might create two rings, but they don't create two gabbro rings, and they certainly don't insert a gabbro core. You don't get a gabbro core from an impact. I don't know what else to tell you. This is just wrong. What do you want me to do? Sit here and flail my arms and start making things up? Well, you want to know what? Actually, I think mermaids created the rings. It's just about as plausible. You want to know what? I'm being mean. Let's give something a little more seriously. Are there any presence of impact spherules? No, there aren't. Impact spherules are these little pieces of material that get kicked up when a asteroid hits the surface of the planet, and they will spread out evenly around a epicenter of an impact, typically speaking. It may be a little uneven in some areas due to the geological regime of some areas, but generally speaking, one of the big things we look for in an impact are impact spherules. There are 0 impact spherules associated with the Richart structure. And David Stig Hansen will never show you any.
A little degraded, kind of like the Carolina Bays. But at the same time, it makes perfect sense when you see those mountains are missing. Stefan and Milo's failure to address any of this critically weakens their narrative.
Because you don't provide any evidence outside of it looks like. And it looks like is not evidence. I'm sorry to everyone who watches this who thinks it looks like is evidence, but it's just not. No, this... What is it, an item on my desk? No, from a distance, this could look like a sandwich. So logically, it must be one, right?
And really, their whole video lacks a main point. They were just laughing and being smug.
David, we're living in a golden age of misinformation, where people like you are acting like they're experts while blatantly getting basic facts wrong, and I showed that earlier in the video. What would you do, or what would you do if someone wasn't taking your facts seriously, David? You'd make fun of them. You'd speak down to them. The only difference is when I do it, or when the Milos do it, it's because we all have actual degrees in this area. It's because we've all actually studied it. So, you know, we get to make fun of people who say there's no volcanic rocks at the Richart because guess what? The rings are volcanic rocks. And I want to be clear here, right? For people who aren't David, because my patience with David is like, it's gone. It's gone. The guy's basically a liar as far as I'm concerned. There is such a thing as academic ivory tower sort of elitism. Elitism, that's the word I'm looking for. Okay? And I think that that's wrong. Anybody, literally anybody, can engage in the sciences. However, engaging in the science and being responsible in the science are two different things. When I walk into the rock lab, I take my beliefs and I leave them at the door. And I have a lot of beliefs that are antithetical to a lot of what science says. And I'm comfortable with that. Because I'm a good enough scientist to understand the difference between good science and bad science. Your beliefs are not what puts science forward. It's the evidence you have. If you want to say it's an impact site, it's on you to find the microspherules associated with that impact. It's on you to find the meteorite that hit it. And these are all things that you could do in your 15 years at the Richart, but you haven't done. And that doesn't make you double think your own theories. Well, that's bad science. Okay? If I make a prediction that this object's going to fall when I drop it, and it doesn't, and I go, well, it actually does fall, but no, that'd be bad science. Evidence, evidence, evidence. That's what matters. Not my beliefs, not your beliefs, not Milo's beliefs, not Old Man Jenkins from down the street's beliefs. No one's beliefs matter in science.
One point, Milo, Rossi, tries to discuss climate cycles. He made a confusing mix-up between the 41,000-year obliquity cycle compared to the precession cycle, which is 25,920 years.
This is actually probably a gaffe on Milo's part. Both of those are heavily associated with Milankovitch cycles. Obliquity and the precession are both a part of the Milankovitch cycles. And those two things put together, along with several other cycles, are why we know certain realities. So, like, we know that the climate is changing far faster than it otherwise should be due to our current position on the Milankovitch cycle. So, I didn't watch the original video. I don't know if Milo actually made this mistake. Again, given all the mistakes I've pointed out in this video, I'm not willing to believe David Stick Hansen that this guy actually made this error. It's more likely that he's not understanding him because he doesn't know what a Milankovitch cycle is. Or maybe he does. He might say something else. I haven't watched this far because I decided to react to this halfway through because, my God, saying that there's no volcanic rocks at the Richart, that's just... How do you get away with being this ignorant for 15 years? I don't understand.
Obliquity refers to changes in the Earth's axial tilt affecting the intensity of seasons, while precession involves the wobble of the Earth's axis, altering the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's orbit.
Here on Sinaticus Apologia, we like to give credit where it's due. This is just correct. Gold star.
Thought you knew that. No, honestly, I learned about 41,000 from Graham Hancock's recent Ancient Apocalypse Season 2. He said 41,000 years, and I'm just like, what? Why is that so much longer? I mean, the precession is actually similar to the Yuga cycle, which is 24,000 years. So I've been dealing with that range in my mind, and when you have the 41,000 number thrown at you, it's like, what? So, he was totally wrong when he mixed that up, and, you could tell by the smug look on his face that he didn't even realize he was embarrassing himself.
Surely people who are educated can be afforded gaffes when they are capable of admitting that they're wrong. Now, I know for a fact that Milo Rossi would be able to admit that he indeed did make a gaffe on this. Why am I not this charitable with David Stick Hansen? Well, because I have had ample conversation with him personally, where he just won't answer basic questions and he won't engage properly. Now, admittedly, I was being a little mean in this conversation, but you can even clearly see here. You make the claim, you prove it stance. This isn't my stance, this is the stance of science. So this guy doesn't even want to admit that he has to prove what he's claiming. Should we be taking anyone seriously who will not prove their claims? I don't think so. Okay, there are plenty of people throughout the entirety of the world who do a lot of work proving their claims. It's not only not fair to put the feelings and opinions of people who won't prove their claims on the same level, it's downright irresponsible. No one should be above anyone else when it comes to presenting information. No one. And do not ever become a slave to someone who won't prove their claims. Now, does that mean that David Stick Hansen is incapable of proving his claims? I imagine somewhere in his videos, of which eventually I'll have a look at when I care enough to do so, I'm sure he presents what he believes is evidence. But that begs the question, if he really does have real, tangible evidence, where's the paper? Where's the data? Why isn't this data readily available? I pulled up the data on the magmatic cores from my own paper that I wrote on the Richart. Getting data is not rocket science. You should just be able to present that at will.
Failure to acknowledge extensive quarrying, terraforming activities that I've personally observed on the ground.
Once again, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that since he can't recognize volcanic rock when he sees it, and he can't recognize mudstone when he sees it, I'm willing to bet that there's no severe terraforming in the area. At the very least, not to the extent that he's suggesting. Again, if anyone wants to show me the supposed terraforming, be my guest. I'll be more than happy to look at it.
The presence of large-scale quarry cuts, mounds resembling mine tailings with a bisection depression that match the next mountain over, like these mountains were created. They clearly indicate some type of human intervention and advanced engineering.
Or they plausibly look similar to that, but they aren't really that. Because if some big tools were used, we would, find that somewhere. One of the big giveaways of all of this, right? Because you could say, oh, well, it eroded away, it's gone. You want to know what doesn't erode? At least not as easily. Copper. if they were using massive machinery, we would certainly find massive amounts of coppers, copper wiring for electricity. Oh, they used the technology we couldn't possibly understand. Good! All the more reason why there should be evidence for this high technology. Why wouldn't there be proof for it? If it's not testable, it's not science. It's just that simple.
Unfortunately, there was a very narrow focus on Paleolithic tools, but those were around 100,000 years ago, up to 1,000,000 years ago.
And they are the only actual archaeological evidence that we have for people at the Richart outside of the modern era, and they are the only things relevant to the discussion of Atlantis. Because they're old. See, anything past the mark doesn't matter to the conversation, right? If it's 8,000 years ago, obviously it can't be Atlantis. Even 6,000 years ago, obviously can't be Atlantis. People maybe not like. I don't want to put words in this guy's mouth. I'm already being mean enough as it is. People within the space that David Stig Hansen is traversing in are more than happy to take this date and push it further back. So anything older is fair game and worth talking about. Indeed, there's no evidence for an industrial civilization, only Paleolithic stuff. Here's a better question. How did that Paleolithic stuff survive the supposed impact that happened? We found it at the site. Unless you want to propose that the impact happened sometime within the deep past and then the artifacts showed up? Because that would then open the gateway for all the erosion that then occurred, right? So we're not making any sense here. Either erosion occurred over all that time or the impact. Wouldn't it explain how the tools left there somehow survived either or if they weren't, if it was just a mountain to begin with?
And carved axe heads that Graham Langdon found and put on his video, tens of thousands of them just laying there near the Richat structure somewhere, kind of shows that there were more new information on Paleolithic tools. The Milo brothers didn't even see this video. They didn't even show it.
Milo Rossi and Stephen Milo are not brothers. That's number one. And number two, no one contests the existence of these artifacts. The Sahara was not always a desert. In fact, it was more of a savanna, and it was even greener in the past. These tools are likely from a time period when it was more green, which does suggest that the Richart had inhabitants around the time. But if their tools survived, why didn't any of their buildings survive? Well, no, David Stig Hansen doesn't even seem to think that these tools and Atlantis are related, or maybe he does. I mean, I think he just implied that he thinks that they're related, but they clearly can't be. It doesn't make any sense that their tools would survive, but their buildings wouldn't. That doesn't make any sense. Especially if you want to invoke a cataclysm that destroyed everything, the tools exclusively surviving makes even less sense.
And I thought that was really significant, supporting Paleolithic tools. However, it doesn't even address. So they talk about all that. They talk about some guy who used to research this as 100 years ago. He didn't have access to aerial photography, okay? So the technology has changed, the information has been updated, but they didn't bother to address the thousands of carved hand axe heads found nearby. And they just go on this old data, they look it up, and they spit it out again, and they're not really doing any real research.
I will once again point out that it's pretty ironic that someone who hasn't done any research is complaining about other people not doing research. Again, anybody, your mom, your dad, your grandma, your cat, you can go on Google Scholar and do the research yourself. And you might think that physically going to the Richart for 15 years is just as good as going to Google Scholar, but if you're going to get basic stuff about the Richart wrong, like the presence of volcanic rocks, then no, that's 15 years that are wasted. Now, as for why they're not addressing these axe heads, I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is yet another example of someone claiming something and not writing a paper, not demonstrating any actual proof. They do kind of look like axe heads, I'll give it that. But I'm not an archaeologist, I'm exclusively a geologist, and I would have to look into that. But even if they are axe heads, again, David, make it make sense. Why would their tools survive, but not their buildings? How is it that an axe head is more durable than a castle?
I captured numerous photographs and gathered first-hand evidence of an ancient infrastructure, and then from the Google Earth as well, you can see it all over. They dismiss these as natural formations, and I've seen ridges and walls. Pardon me, I'm having a drink. The Richat structure clearly points to a potentially advanced and organized society.
And this is the difference between someone educated and uneducated. Things that look like they were made by people don't always mean that they were made by people. Mother Nature makes some wild stuff. Pardon me, I'm having a drink. And because of that, just sitting here and saying, well, it looks man-made, is not good evidence. You would have to examine the stratigraphy, examine the context in which we find it. Are there any tool marks on the wall? Are there any tools next to the wall? And no, the stone axes very obviously don't count for obvious reasons, because you can't do that level of terraforming with just stone axes. So, basically what I'm being told here is that he thinks these are man-made because they look man-made. And that's it. That's it. That's the argument. Hundreds of years of resources, hundreds of years of research, no volcanic rocks, by the way. Don't you dare Google that. Don't you dare look on Google Scholar. Don't you dare address anyone else. Only listen to the big D. Hansen. He's the only guy who knows the Richart. Only guy. Not Abdina, not Matan, not me. Only him.
However, the Milo brothers' refusal to consider any of this evidence and their reliance on unverified sources such as Wikipedia demonstrate a real troubling disregard for research.
It's true. Wikipedia is not a true academic citation. I will once again point out the irony of someone who has not read the actual material on the Richart complaining about people who have not actually read material on the Richart. However, Wikipedia has this little thing called citations. You can click on those citations and you can see what they're citing. So when you cite Wikipedia, you're not really citing nothing. You're citing the citation that is summarized on the Wikipedia article. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that Wikipedia is a reliable source. So typically you would go down and, I don't know, look at the citations. It seems very weird to me that Hansen would sit down and tell us that the Wikipedia page for the Richart structure doesn't have any citations. I'm not going to bother to show it to you. You can go look it up yourself. Just go to that little dibbly-doo keyboard, type in Richart structure, and scroll to the bottom, and you'll see that he's just wrong. That there are citations, and those citations appear in actual science journals, where people with PhDs who have spent thousands of hours studying this have written material that is not unsubstantiated because they went there and got the actual data. And then they wrote a paper about it. Which is, again, another big difference. This guy says he's been here for 15 years. Not one paper produced on any of his data. You want to know what we call 15 years of research with no data? A waste of money and time.
This place is a site of immense geological and archaeological significance that deserves a comprehensive and unbiased investigation.
Of which it's received, of which you ignore. Again, no one who thinks that there's no magma evidence at the Richart deserves to be taken seriously. Because people who have done the research, people who have been there just as much as you have, but have actually presented the data to us, have shown beyond reasonable doubt that it does indeed have it. I don't know what else to tell you, other than that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. You want to make a splash? You want your data to be taken seriously? Take that 15 years and condense it into a paper and post it to a science journal. And if you can't do that, well, then there's no reason for anyone to be taking this seriously at all. There's just no reason whatsoever. And again, I hate to sound elitist. Scientific elitism is a real problem, and I'm not a scientific elitist. All I'm merely saying is that to put a dataless, paperless person at the same level as someone who has data, has written papers, where's the balance, folks? Do any of these alternative thinkers actually care about the science? I don't think so. Because if they did, we wouldn't have to be dealing with ridiculous claims that there being no magma at all.
But Stephen Milo and Milo Rossi's video doesn't do any justice to its complexity and oversimplifies its origins and dismisses, with a smug attitude, any alternative theories. And my extensive research and first-hand experience reveal there's much more to be examined.
Smug they may be, at least they're correct. Basic facts, man. You gotta get the basic facts down right. That's all there is to it.
And it's time to give a more thorough, respectful exploration of this remarkable site.
I think it's very entertaining that we didn't even see a single clip from the original video. He's just sort of nebulously responding to things and not showing what they actually said. I am not going to bother to go out of my way at 2:35 a.m. that I'm recording this, because it's the only time I'm free, to bother to sit down and watch a whole other video that I don't even know if I'll be able to find. Maybe I can find it, I don't know. But to essentially say that what you're saying deserves respect, I think is sort of like a catch-22 type deal, in that I think what anyone says deserves respect, but you don't engage with the facts. Okay? It's like talking to a flat earther when they deny the evidence for gravity. Where do you go from there? If they don't accept gravity, well, then we're just living in two different realities, huh? If you can't accept that it's not an impact site, and that indeed there is volcanic rock at the Richart, then we're just living in two different realities, now aren't we? I think I'm going to end it here. He doesn't say anything worth substance afterwards. What have we learned? Well, for starters, we've learned garbage in, garbage out. There is absolutely no reason for us to believe the words of someone who gets basic facts incorrect. There's just no reason for it. There's no reason for us to believe someone who lies about their credentials or operates with this weird loosey-goosey definition of what an archaeologist is. And there's no reason to believe in someone who says that they are looking for good engagement, but then won't actually engage. Am I being a little petty? Yeah. I was rude to this guy. He was rude to me. We didn't get along. It happens. But I think it's really, really, really telling that someone like this can basically feel comfortable lying to themselves. I don't know about you guys, but if I knew that I was lying about something, it would just eat me up completely. And someone might be willing to comment down below, oh, well, and from his perspective, he's not lying. All I can really say is that no one serious who has been doing 15 years of research on any site would be ignorant about the basic facts of the site as we know it based off what we actually have from actual research. And the annoying bit of it all is that research doesn't even collide with the idea that there could have been a settlement there. That's the real annoying bit to all of this, that you could still have your alternative theory and be familiar with the basics of the site, and yet someone like David Stig Hansen chooses not to be. No, I think this really speaks to the truth of the matter here. This is not science. This is a belief, and your beliefs belong in the pews, not the scientific lab. So, this has been a new responding to video. I'm still alive. I've been Josh for Sinaticus Apologia. Shalom Aleichem.